Wars may ignite for different reasons, and there are also different types of wars, but they all end with the same result: destruction. Currency wars are destroying the U.S. empire. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into this more traditional type of war. This information is out of the AP, and it said the report from the Senate Intelligence Committee will be the first public accounting of the CIA's use of what critics call torture on Al-Qaeda detainees held at black sites in Europe and Asia. And basically this is a summary, a 480-page summary of a 6,000 plus page report. They went ahead and were performing all kinds of sick torture on these detainees. We saw what happened in Abu Ghraib, we saw what happened in other areas, and we know specifically that there is more going on that we're not being told at these so-called black sites. What's happening here is basically how the governments are not explaining what is really going on behind the scenes, and surely some of it must be kept confidential, understandably, at least to most people, but it seems as though the presidents and prime ministers around the world are performing acts and deeds on their own merits. They're doing this all by themselves. In fact, this is all connected in with the National Defense Authorization Act signed by Lord Obama himself, and this is basically to allow him to illegally detain, torture, kill anyone that he wants to, just under the suspicion of terrorism. And that is what happened with the Patriot Act, all under suspicion. So anyone is really a possible victim here. This is quite sad that it has gone this far down. Let's look at this extreme propaganda out of CTV News in Canada. America and NATO troops closed their operational command in Afghanistan on Monday, lowering flags in a ceremony to mark the formal end of their combat mission in a country still mired in the 13 years after the US-led invasion toppled the Taliban regime for harboring those responsible for 9/11. That's right, they went in and blew up a whole bunch of caves, and they went in there and murdered a whole bunch of people, and just happened to take over the opium fields and have controlled that, and have been accomplices to the shipping in of those drugs into the Western nations. And then of course there is a reason to put the people in jail for their heroin usage and all sorts of things like this. But basically, the reason I mention this is that the war is never over. In fact, even though they've closed their operational command, they still say that they're going to go on for at least another 2 years. It's never going to end because they have to protect those opium fields. They want the oil pipelines running through there. There are many different reasons why they're in Afghanistan, but it just goes to show you that the wars do not end. They only expand. So let's get on with this here, where Senator Sessions, actually one of the most outspoken people in government right now, it is very good, very courageous of him, but all of them need to be doing this. All people need to be doing this right now, because you only have your freedom of speech, not to talk about the weather, not to talk about the senseless things. You have it specifically to talk about controversial issues, things you disagree with, things you do agree with. That's why we have freedom of speech. That's why people fought and died to have that as your right, and people take advantage of it every day. So what he said was this, talking about the amnesty order, and basically they didn't even he didn't actually sign the amnesty, and this is really outrageous here. So he said, I guess they just whispered in the ear of the DHS director over at Homeland Security, just put out a memo, that way we won't have to enforce the law. Quite amazing the way he said this. And he also said, we don't even have a really significant direct legal direction that we can ascertain precisely what the president is doing. It's a stunning event in my view. He's going ahead and doing everything that he wants. I mean, do I have to mention it again? The National Defense Authorization Act, this is the most unbelievably criminal act that has ever been put into place to my knowledge. It allows him to literally kill people on his word. That is exactly a dictator. There's no other way to put that. When you say that sort of thing, people think that you're exaggerating, or they're just calling you a fearmonger. Obama's not that bad. Look, he's trying to help. It's those Democrats. It's those Republicans. It's that you-know-who. It's this guy. It's that guy. That's not how it works. There are other people controlling Obama, that's for sure. They go behind the scenes, they are existent in the shadows, and they control him. But it still means that his actions could then be passed on to the next president and the next one after, and we will see much more destruction occurring in the future. That destruction is not just to our civil liberties, but also to the nations themselves. Let's look into this. One country who is really affected by inflation right now is Venezuela, and this is the one region that we need to look at to see how it all unfolds, because it seems that many countries will be following in the same footsteps. And this is nothing new. This has happened to many countries before in history. And they're actually going to expand the definition of international reserves to include diamonds and some foreign currency commitments. And this is basically nothing but a struggle to really keep up with the inflation rates. They want to look good in the public eye. They don't want the inflation to increase so fast. They are having a big trouble right now, and they're doing everything they can to fix it. Of course, ultimately, it looks like they're going to default, and this is going to be a big problem for the creditors, and an even bigger problem for the citizens. But of course, doing things like this isn't going to solve anything. They're just trying to buy some time, and that's not going to give them much time, because ultimately, we know which direction it's heading. So if we look at Venezuela, we can sort of predict what's going to happen to the future of our nations that we live in. Let's look at what I wrote about in my book, and that's the generally accepted accounting principles. Every company needs to abide by these rules. And then I said this: the U.S. government is reporting a $1.3 trillion federal deficit. And then when we include the off-balance sheet numbers, if we use generally accepted accounting principles, we get a number that exceeded $5 trillion, and if you look at more recent statistics, it's actually much higher, but my book is written a couple of years ago now. So you're looking at many times higher than the actual government's report is done. So with the government's numbers are fraudulent. If you look at Venezuela, they put out their inflation numbers. We don't even know if they're accurate or not, but already it shows you that the individual citizen is screwed. And then you look at what's happening right now in the US, for example. They put out these fake inflation numbers. They don't include food. They don't include electricity, two prices that have been rising consistently, at least for myself. I'm in Canada. I know that I speak to so many others. I get emails all the time talking about how their food prices are rising, and they live in different countries around the world. We're all being affected by this. So the numbers they put out are not true, but we need to look deeper into them, and in many instances we can actually use the numbers to prove how bad it is, and then think about how much worse the reality is. So this is pretty amazing to look at. And this all connects in with the currency wars that are taking place around the world. Let's look at this traditional war right here from 1941 out of the Wall Street Journal. Pretty amazing to read this kind of history here. I suggest you do look through this right here. And it says, war with Japan. U.S. industry's sole objective, arms production speed up. Congress prepares to act. Tax bill will be rushed. New York Stock Exchange to open as usual today. And you know, there are many more amazing things in here. Just wanted to note here that this is a currency war. This was a hot war that was taking place back in 1941. And of course, there was currency wars back then as well, but nothing like we have today. Let's look at this right here out of the Wall Street Journal again. And this is current times, how we see the central bankers struggling against weak growth and falling inflation have come up with a cunning plan, shift the problems onto someone else. And that is a currency war. This is something that I've talked about significantly over these past few years, talked about it in my book as well. And it's pretty obvious when you look at this that the governments around the world, of course, at some degree are all agreeing with each other. We have the G20 all going ahead and making these criminal acts, putting things into law that are ultimately to strangle the individual citizen. But we do see other things happening where we see factions forming and currency wars do take place, and ultimately a nation has its own best interests in mind. And they said this: the way to do this is to devalue their currencies. China has clearly done this, but they are not just the only one. Pretty much every single country around the world is engaging in monetary stimulus to the likes of which they have never seen before. This is, just as an example right here, Japan doing so, and it is printing up trillions upon trillions of yen, all in order to boost up not the economy, but to boost up the zombie banking system. And they believe that by pumping, or they say that by pumping money into the banks, that people will be able to take out more money from the bank. They'll loan it out at interest, of course, and then they'll buy things like boats and houses and cars and appliances and so on and so forth. But that doesn't work like that. We see the individual cash strapped. They're in the maximum amount of debt they have been. And we see things like aging populations that have taken place. We see social security funds that are being excavated at an alarming rates, and this is basically a global phenomenon. So let's move on quickly. When the BIS is telling you that there's a problem, and that's the Bank for International Settlements, we know that something serious is going down. Let's look at this. Once again, on the heels of the turbulence, major central banks made soothing statements suggesting that they might delay normalization in the light of evolving macroeconomic conditions. Recent events, if anything, have highlighted once more the degree to which markets are relying on central banks. The market's buoyancy hinges on central banks' every word and deed. It's practically what I've said in countless videos, and this is the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, actually saying that the central banks are screwing up because the whole world relies on exactly what they say at all times. If you look at the charts, you see as soon as they say something, that's when the chart moves. As they say we're going to engage in QE4, the chart will continue to move up every single day on average, every single day, until they say something else that would negate that. That's the way it's been working. If you see that comment, the QE4 comment that Bullard made a little while ago, the stock market has basically, the US stock market has basically been increasing almost every single day since. If Bullard comes out and says we will not engage in QE4, QE4 is done, we will see a dip in the market occur until something else by the central bank changes. That's the way this works. It is not fundamentals. It is not 200-day moving averages, 50-day moving averages. It is not what Obama says. It is none of this. We have to realize that everything that the market does is all in relation to what the central bank says. Not even what they do, just what they say. It's pretty amazing to see these times engaging like this, with the currency wars taking place as currencies are being devalued globally by the central banks in a race to the bottom. Now, one other thing I just want to note just very quickly at the end, we see crude oil prices declining rapidly right now, heading towards that $60 range, and previously in the financial crisis we saw it dip down to approximately $35 a barrel. This is something that we definitely need to watch after, because it does have a very interesting look at the economy when the prices are very low. That should spark certain sectors, but it also hurts other sectors. So this is very interesting to note. Let's keep our eyes on the oil prices and also connect that in with what has happened in the Middle East. And we need to realize that many things, as I said, many things are going on here that we can't see in front of our eyes. We need to look deeper into them and just basically keep our eyes on them. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. You scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.